Welcome to the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen, and I'm Phil Dobbie. Today, will higher oil prices drive alternative energy investment? Oil prices are, of course, highly volatile, but even though he keeps saying he wants prices lower, President Trump is helping constrain supply from Iran and Venezuela. Well, constraints, perhaps a bit of a tame word, totally eradicate, really. So will that push oil prices higher? After all, we are seeing Brent crude prices closer to $80 a barrel now. So, as fossil fuels become more expensive, does that mean we'll start to shift towards environmentally sustainable alternatives? Could supply and price be the planet's savior? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast. So, Steve, I do wonder whether Donald Trump is actually a closet environmentalist, because at the surface level, it doesn't sound like it, does it? I mean, he is pro-oil, he's removed environmental protections, he's approved pipelines, and he's pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, of course. But on the other side, he is stopping this flow of oil from Iran and Venezuela. That's helping to elevate prices. So does that mean if oil prices go up, does that mean we're more likely to switch to more environmentally friendly alternatives if the prices stay higher for longer?
No, well, as you like anything Donald Trump ever does, it's if it does anything good, it's an accident. But in that particular case, it's certainly in the very short term, it doesn't have any impact upon switching over, because you can't just decide, oh damn, oil's too expensive today, I'll fuel my car with solar power instead. You've got to change the infrastructure.
Yeah, it's got to be sustained. But if it was sustained, it was as high as $148 a barrel back in 2008. It's been hovering around $80 a barrel for most of last year. Then it dipped. Then it came back up again. It's sort of pretty close to that level. And we know that oil reserves are getting low as well. So it could get higher. So, if it becomes consistent, then from what you're saying, well, yes, we would start to look at alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly are already, because that's one reason I'm, regardless of what else happens, I'm going to remain a fan of Elon Musk, because he's made electric cars sexy. Whether they're the solution or not is another story entirely.
Have you ever driven a Tesla?
No, and I do want to. Have you?
It is. I tell you, it is unreal. You will never be happy in any other car after you've driven one.
That's exactly what I've heard from most people who've driven one. And I want my petrol head. I've got one of my best mates back in Australia he qualifies as a petrol head. It's mainly on motorbikes that he's a petrol head rather than cars. But he sort of poo-poos them as, oh my God, they've got no, look at them, how ugly they are. There's no sex appeal, yada, yada, yada. My basic is, you put your foot on the accelerator, mate, and you're going to feel sex. Yeah,
I know. It is incredible how they pull away. Absolutely incredible. I mean, 0 to 60 in, I don't know how many seconds, but I mean, just, when you're on a motorway and you've got a very short run on and you're going, if you've virtually stopped, you can be at the speed of the traffic by the end of the run on the motorway. Yeah. So, yeah.
But that raises one of the issues as well, which is onto the counterpoint. Sort of one of the groups that I follow on Twitter, Limits to Growth, makes, and also Tim Garrett, my research associate now on the role of energy. And that is that what we tend to do when we find more efficient ways of using energy, we don't use less, we use more energy. And so this is a whole question, how much energy goes into the Tesla itself, and what is the actual energy implications of continuing to use roads for transportation? We know even Teslas are going to get stuck in traffic jams.
Will we drive more because it's such a pleasant experience driving a Tesla? We say, well, let's drive 3 times as much.
Exactly. And this actually goes back to what's called the Jevons paradox. And one of the few times I'm going to quote favorably a father of neoclassical economics, that the Jevons pointed out that was what he'd seen historically as well. When we found more efficient ways of using energy, we used more energy, we didn't use less. And the question comes back to, is it a case that we simply have to find more efficient ways of using energy, or do we have to use less energy? And on that case, the evidence that I see, particularly from Tim Garrett's work, but also what I've been doing myself, and looking at the things like the overshoot we can see in the human ecological footprint, knowing the levels of carbon we've got at the moment, even if it didn't raise issues about more carbon going into the atmosphere, which of course it does, there's still an issue. We may have to drastically reduce energy consumption for something of the nature of the next 40 to 60 years if we're going to make life on this planet sustainable.
So is more expensive energy going to do that then? Because so if oil became more expensive, then okay, we might go to alternatives, but those alternatives are not going to be as cheap as oil used to be. So we're still paying more for energy. So does that mean we will use less energy than we used to because we're paying more for it?
Well, that again comes part of the context is, can we do this while maintaining the level of consumption we currently, inverted commas, enjoy? And I'm using that inverted commas two reasons. One, a lot of consumption is wasteful. We know the side effects of it, and we, of course, don't have an even distribution of it around the planet. But if we imagine, can we manage to make the transition from the high carbon and high energy world we have now to a future world which is also high energy but low carbon? The information I'm seeing, and again, I know more than most people in this, but I would not yet call myself an expert. What I can see, the two are incompatible. We have such a level of, and this is not just, in some ways, actually, I'm glad we've got global warming because it's such a major large-scale issue and obvious at the same time in terms of, we're feeling that, apart from us that belong to the flat Earth society that also believe global warming is conspiracy and the place is getting cooler, most of us are experiencing it and have seen it in our own lifetimes. And it implies if we're going to do anything about it, we have to do a major rework of human society. Now, that is much more visible than what's happening, and this is something which I've only realized by seeing recent writing about it and then putting my own mind back over my own personal history. They're now calling the Insectageddon, because if you go for a drive now from, let's take a Sydney, Australian location, if you go from Sydney to Burke, or if you're in Europe, you drive from London, if you drive from Amsterdam to Paris, you're not going to be spending most of your time wiping insects off the windshield because they're not there anymore. But I vividly remember as a child in my father's car going for long family holidays from Sydney to Port Macquarie and ultimately to Walgett as well, that it was just keep them windscreen wipers going, wash them insects off.
Well, I hate to disagree with you on this one. I just drove back from the Lake District a week ago, and our windscreen was smothered in insects. So they are still around. They're just choosing carefully where they go. But look, if
I'm glad you're finding them there because that's good news.
Everywhere else they've gone. Yeah, that isn't it. So the environment is changing. We need to do something about it. And we sort of know that. But the question is how much of that can be driven by economics. So if the price of oil or energy generally rises, then are we going to use less of it? Are we going to sort of manage to find a way where we say, okay, well, we need to use energy more efficiently, but still have the same output. So we need to be more careful about how we use it. We need new processes which are going to be less energy intensive that are still going to get the same results for us.
And will the price rise and motivate all those things? Back to the first point. This is one of the issues that actually is coming up in the two what look like very opposing public protests right now, but actually have a very common core, and that's the Gilets jaunes in Paris, in France, and the Extinction Rebellion in London, which of course that's now going. They're both in various ways gone global. But the point of the reason that the Gilets jaunes first occurred was a proposal by Macron to put up fuel taxes. And it was going to start in 2019, and on November 17. We had the first of the Gilets jaunes protests. They date back in terms of development to sometime in October, from what I can tell. But that was saying, no way, we can't afford it. We are already, and this is the we we're talking about, are effectively the dispossessed the dispossessed and disenfranchised of France. They're the people who don't live in Paris, who don't have comfortable high incomes from the globalized world that Paris is part of, and who have to drive to work each day because they don't live in Paris where there's a great metro, and they're driving in cars which are a large number of them have become diesel, whether they're working in trucks which have always been predominantly diesel, or the cars that French in particular switched over to diesel back when it was seen as an environmentally advantageous fuel, which is not
right.
the case.
But that is a symptom, isn't it? I mean, you could easily say, well, okay, we're going to give you subsidies to try and compensate for the fact that if you've got an old car, you need to shift. The issue, though, is that they're saying, well, we can't afford to do that because we're so disenfranchised because the rich-poor gap is so big. So if that didn't exist, if the gap wasn't so wide, they wouldn't be so worried about these things.
Exactly. And I think this is the problem about trying to use price. And of course, carbon tax affects price. That's literally what it has to do. It puts the price up. Is price the rationing mechanism we need? And this is where we come to a clash between the neoclassical vision of price as an allocated mechanism between different products and the reality, I'm afraid to say, which is more what the post-Keynesian world looks like theoretically, that price is an allocation mechanism between workers and capitalists in the twofold way. You first of all have a wage bargain, of course, which is something which sets the monetary value of the wage, but because the monetary value of the wage is one of the major inputs to the cost of production in manufacturing, and that then leads back to a response by manufacturers who will may or may not put up prices in response to the wage rises, and the two affect each other in a counteracting way. Now, what the post-Keynesians therefore see the role of prices is fundamentally an allocation mechanism between workers and capitalists. Now, if you had the income level of the 50s and 60s, relative income levels, then the impact would not be so great. But given the extent to which workers have suffered through globalization in the West in particular, and also the point that I make out that the rising level of private debt is actually paid for by a lower wages share for workers, it's the workers who are copping it. And if you try to do the entire thing through the price mechanism, it's basically saying if you're poor, you're going to pay for carbon, you're going to pay for fighting carbon. If you're rich, it doesn't matter. You can afford the fuel. You can even afford the Tesla.
Yeah, well, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Look, this is the first 10 minutes or so of a 40-minute conversation. If you want to hear it in full, then you need to subscribe, and you can do that in one of two ways. Either you can become a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon if you pledge $10 or more to support his work on researching a new way of economics. Then you'll get access to this and all the other podcasts in the series, and you can do that at patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen, or you can subscribe at debunkingeconomics.com. Choose one of the subscription options on the right-hand side of the front page on that website, and hopefully you'll do one of those two things, and we'll see you back here soon for the full edition of this podcast. I'm Phil Dobbie, he's Steve Keen. Back again soon.